ask one question. Uh, Basically, you were talking about the coal ordinance bill and the auctions which have taken place right now and the formulated. What do you think? There is a cartelization or not in the coal block this thing? Because some of the power, some of the coal has been moved, sold at 120 rupees, and in adjacent mines the coal was auctioned at 1200 rupees. How do you justify all that thing?
I think I'll not go into the cartelization other things. Basically, for Andhra and the south-based plants, what I would like to mention is the imported coal, because of the dynamics of global coal prices and other things, south of Vindhyas, if I can put it, because of the ports availability and also the capacity available in the ports, imported coal on a long term makes sense, and also it adds to the protecting your environment of moving long distances coal from the north. The policy of captive coal block is very good, and it has given the dividends from point of view of the central India plants for having their short movement of coal within the, like almost like a pit head. Any policy, anything, there will be gaming, there will be private sector, again, motivation of increasing the revenues and other things. There could be cartelization. I don't want to get into that at all. Basic point of coal I'm making here is south-based plants, please think about imported coal as an option. The new plants which are going to come are also 60 to 70% of your coal, and tying up long-term, either the block overseas or on a long-term basis on getting the coal. That's what the limited point I would like to make here. Mr. Yeah, please.
I mean, just a general question in the audience. Is there anyone from GAIL or GSPC here? Because we've seen two excellent presentations talk about gas pooling and what that might imply in terms of cost of power and cost of generation. What options are available for developers as well as governments to try and make that work. But is there anyone from GAIL, GSPC available here? You see, the fun piece here is that if you think that you're going to get gas at $7 or $6, that's the delivered ex-ship spot price today. The majority of the gas that comes in India is the long-term Qatari contract. And so there are two pieces to the Qatari contract. There is a 50% long-term Qatari contract, and there's a 4-year Qatari contract. This 4-year Qatari contract still takes a 5-year average on the oil price, which also then continues to include periods when the price of oil was $100 odd. So if the pooling is a mechanism to make gas cheaper in India, it perhaps is also a mechanism to make gas importers more viable, as it might make some power plants more operational. So this is just kind of something to think about. When you're having this conversation, it's also important to recognize where this gas is coming from and at what price would that be available, and whether the number that we see today, still making gas-based power being still fairly expensive, whether even higher numbers would be reasonable or possible to look at. There is simply no way that the country can move forward without generating enough production domestically. And in the end, there is less reliability of more expensive gas coming into the country. That's something that one should always kind of acknowledge and be conscious about.
Mr. Dev, I have it, Mr. Dev. I'm here on your right.
Sir.
Mr. Dev, I'm on your right. Look at right, I'm here. You're looking on the other side. You are from British Petroleum, economists there. I must first of all say that we must thank British Petroleum, all energy sector professional, for the yeoman service that you've been doing in bringing out this periodical statistical details and forecasts on energy outlook. And as you know, up to 2035, I have been reading this.
Thank you.
So my question is on a global scenario which you presented. This is the energy outlook that you project for the entire world.
Yes.
Now, British Petroleum himself being a player, what is the outlook that British Petroleum themselves are declaring for the next, say, 20 years? Why I'm asking this question, I've been told that British Petroleum is now curtailing their expenses for not so essential work. This I've been told from Europe, you know, work which is not so essential, they're closing down. So which means the British Petroleum themselves probably think that the outlook is not so bright. So may I have some answer to that. People have been telling me, from England especially, that kind of work that they used to do for British Petroleum, for example, like Infosys and companies like that, they're closing it down, they may not expand the contract, so the boys are coming back. There's a lot of uncertainty for British Petroleum. Those who are working for Indian companies, software companies for British Petroleum. So what is the outlook British Petroleum is giving?
So let me kind of take a step back and give you some perspective here. The 3 years between 2011 and 2013 were the highest oil prices that we've ever seen in the history of the world. They were also the most stable oil prices. But ever since October of last year, since prices of oil have started to fall, the total capital expenditure cut announced by all oil companies in the world put together adds up to a few $100 billion. A few $100 billion, over $250 billion, that was aggregated and reported at CERAWeek last week in Houston. Within this, to the extent that a company like BP reduces its reliance on Infosys, is probably a very small decimal point. But the more important piece of the puzzle is that drilling activity is going to get reduced. E&P activity is going to get reduced. So if a country like India has to compete in this global international market for a smaller capital pie, it's a complex story to tell. Globally, the amount of capital expenditure that comes down effectively then also means gas and oil output over time will stop increasing as the rapid clip it has today. The increases in production for both gas and oil, LNG as well as tight oil, that have resulted in price drops, then at some point will get eaten away. That's how every industry responds to commodity cycles. That's how every industry responds to price cycles, and so will ours.
Mr. Dasgupta, I have a question. The name is Harry Dole with a cap, right? On your left at 10 o'clock. That's Keshav. Mr. Dev was looking at me. I'm so sorry about that. Maybe it's the hat. Okay, 2 quick points. I had the privilege of being on the advisory committee of Ministry of Power last year. The year before last. And we tried very hard, answering the gentleman on hydro, we tried very hard to get something called HPO off the ground. And the idea of getting HPO off the ground was, it was hydropower obligation. And the idea was that if every distribution company makes up a point to buy 10%, 5% of their power from hydro sources, then there is a possibility, like in RPO obligation, that hydro projects which are being planned, particularly by the private sector, will come up. And I'm going to take 2 minutes of the audience's time to share with you a true story. A private developer went to Arunachal Pradesh and he came to me, he was one of our members, he came to me literally with tears in his eyes and he said, you know what, I went to Guwahati and then from there, after I got off, I went by car. It took me the full day to travel. I slept at some circuit house in some God knows desolate place. And then next morning again at 4:35 we started. And 4 o'clock in the afternoon we reached the site where the project was to come up. Waiting to receive us is the tribal chief. So I show him my letter from Ministry of Power. I have been allocated to set up a hydropower project. So that the chief looks at the letter like this, hands it back. He says, I don't know what this is. You can keep it. I don't recognize it. He says, no, but this is Government of India. He says, what? I don't know what you're talking about. You want to set up a project here, you talk to me. All right. Now, he started discussing with his team, so he extended his stay. He's talked to him. Finally, the chief was satisfied and project was about to take off. But however, the next day in the 4 o'clock again, as he's about to leave, one old jeep comes from Arunachal Pradesh Forest Department. Sir, I'm so sorry, I'm late. No problem. We have sorted everything out. Government of India is on board. Chief is on board. Sorry, sir, there's slight problem. It is mandatory that since you're going to submerge forest, you have to have compensatory forest. He says, oh, I didn't know that. So where do we go and plant the forest? He says, Arunachal Pradesh, there is no place to, everything is forest already. So your project can't come up. I mean, this is a true story of somebody who has bid for a project, spent money on development, done the DPR, sorted out the chief. So why I have illustrated this story to you is, then this company came to us and said, can you find a way for us to sign up PPA? There was a mention of a power purchase agreement, pros and cons. Banks want us to sign a PPA, then they will finance us. So I said, sure. I introduced him to one or two distribution companies. They were government owned. The fellow asked one question, when is your power expected to start? 10 years, 5 years, 8 years, 7 years. Oh, okay. What's the price? Should be between 4 rupees and 10 rupees. He says, listen, when you know when your power will come and you can tell me the price, I as a government officer will sign a PPA with you. Till then, don't bother me. Moral of the story, no hydro project is going to come up unless government creates an environment for hydro projects to be set up. And I think the point made by the gentleman about 25 megawatts is a very important point. We have a large amount of hydro potential which we are not pushing. Now, why did we push HPO in the steering committee? We wanted to push HPO for one reason. If I am getting variable cost zero, only fixed charges from a hydro source, the volatility that my friend Mr. Dave talked about, which right now the oil prices may be down, but tomorrow they'll go up again. We'll go back to again $100 billion, $150 billion every year of import of fossil fuel. This is point one. Second was on gas. Unfortunately or unfortunately, one of the avatars I've had is I was the advisor to Maharashtra State Electricity Board during the early days of the Enron Dabhol transaction. I have actually seen contracts of LNG, particularly from Qatar, since you mentioned QGPC, which were talking about a fixed price contract. They were not linked to any oil basket, nothing. And that time the Japanese companies, and I'm sure he knows about it, Kyushu Electric and some of the others, had long-term contracts because they were looking at LNG non-linked to any oil basket. And they said, we'll give you a 15% rate of, we want a 15% rate of return in dollar terms, and you can take the gas. Somewhere along the line, some brilliant guy, I don't know who it was, linked it to oil. And that's where the volatility problem started. I don't know whether Kaushik has the name of the guy who did this genius, but the result has been the Qatari gas, which was to come to us as $2.75 a million BTU, under 5 million tons, if I remember correctly. The Qataris made $30, $36, and I'm told they bought half of London from the money that was supposed to be made by the Indians. So I just thought I'll share these two inputs. Thank you.
I just wanted to know why MMBTU why it is not in gross calorific value kind of thing. I just wanted to know out of academic interest to Mr. Kaushik.
Depends on how you look at your temperature, no? Centigrade, Fahrenheit or centigrade or whatever. Once I told somebody at 104 degrees temperature, he said, what, centigrade or what?
Why they call it BTU?
Million BTUs.
Why call it MMBTU? Why don't we call GCV or kind of thing, UHV kind of?
You can convert it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. One more question we can take.
One question
from the
to Mr.
audience.
Kaushik. You are mentioning the fixed rate for import of LNG. Mr. Kaushik Dev.
Yeah.
I think the GAIL has entered into agreement for Henry Hub price for the past 2 years. So there is no more fixed price contract with the importers, whereas previously Qatari gas or other gas, it was on fixed price. But of late from year 2013, I think GAIL has entered into agreement with foreign countries, especially USA and especially Texas-based companies for gas import at Henry Hub price.
So first of all, I must confess my lack of sight. Usually I'm not so blind, but these floodlights here make me extremely confused. So if you think that right now I'm looking at you, I'm just pretending to look at you. Mr. Dawal just very eloquently described the fact that Qatari gas is not fixed price. It's linked to the price of oil. So it's a certain slope on the price of oil. It's 12% of the price of oil. And oil defined in terms of a basket. At this point, the few long-term contracts that we have are mostly in the Middle East and all in Qatar. The new long-term contract that's supposed to become operational at some point next year is going to be from Gorgon in Australia, which is a more expensive contract at 14.8% of the price of oil. BP was the first company in the world, not BP India, but the first trading company in the world that negotiated a Henry Hub indexed oil gas contract, but that was for TEPCO in Japan, and that was out of my trading office in Singapore. And that is Henry Hub indexed gas that will start coming into Japan only next year or so. What GAIL has is a fairly expensive project that they are part financing in Sabine Pass in the US, and that is Henry Hub indexed and Henry Hub linked. It's effectively a price built up on a Henry Hub value, but that gas is not coming into the country before the next 3 years or so. So at this point, everything that we have, a very small volume is spot, the remainder is oil indexed, and at some point our oil indexed volumes will increase and become more expensive, and then at some point in the future we will have gas coming in from the US, which may not be very different from oil index price in terms of the final aggregate value when it lands through the country. But we'll have to see. The good thing, of course, is that as long as there is competition in the market, as long as there are a variety of aggregators and merchant suppliers, there will be enough competition to make sure that whatever gas comes at the best price. Tomorrow, if a domestic producer turns around and says that I will charge you X value, and you as a power producer can get an X minus value from the LNG market, you should be able to do that, and vice versa.
I just want to have some few concluding remarks. What this panel would like to, I think, suggest 4 or 5 points. One is, don't complicate the already complicated sector by bringing in pooling is a good thing, but I think the risk has to be taken by who can take the risk. Don't make the private sector suffer further. I think with the existing, the timing of the decision also is important. The present market, the spot market, or next 2 years, let us link up the LNG at a price which will be affordable to the discoms. And based on that, let us quickly go ahead and do this particular, implement this policy rather than keeping it open for long, number one. Second is, think long term in terms of the coal when it comes to tie up, because coal prices are very less as far as the global coal price is concerned. LNG also, I think we need to tie up on a long term based on this one. And as rightly told by Mr. Kaushik, I think domestic hydrocarbon has to be given a lot of impetus. I think we have a lot of resources there. This needs to be put under this one. So short term and long term, but timing of the decision of this pooling has to be fast, and the sacrifices to be made by the government has to be very clear, and then tie up this LNG in the short term. I always believe in that we should have telescope in one eye and microscope on other eye, not to miss both the points. With this, I would like to conclude the session. Thank you.
Well, we got to see that the plans announced by Mr. Ajay Jain, they are not only in drawing board, but they're implemented. So that means we need the supply of fuel and coal in Andhra Pradesh to make sure that Mr. Jain's promises are kept, 30,000 megawatt by 2018 or so. So I think we'll all try to do that in our own capacity as much as possible, Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please share with me, and a big round of applause to Mr. Ranganathan, then Mr. Vishwanath, who chaired the session, Mr. Kaushik Dev, who gave us a global scenario on British Petroleum, future of British Petroleum also he's talked about, and Mr. Shravan Sampath. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. And thank you, the audience, for these questions. We are now breaking for lunch for 45 minutes. We assemble here after 45 minutes. Thank you very much.